every bit as real as the physical battles that we face. The spiritual battle, sometimes it's hard to recognize where the enemy is coming from, and yet he is coming, and he is coming often, and we have to be aware of it and ready for this particular battle that we face as followers of Jesus Christ. And it's one, we talked last week, that it's one that we fight not from the posture of a soldier, though, right? It's not one that we fight in the posture of a boxer, even. It's one that's fought from a position that you would not expect and you would not be taught from here, in our worldly physical battles. The way we fight from strength is from standing on our knees, right? It's a posture of humility, not a posture of my own physical prowess and strength. And we don't fight for victory. We fight from victory. Christ has already won the war on our behalf. So we don't fight to win. We fight from a place of already having won. But that presents a problem for us in that why in the world are we still fighting battles if the war is already won? You can go to any conflict, any war that's been fought, and after the peace treaty was signed, guess what continues to take place? Little battles until word gets to both sides that the war has already been decided. There's always battles that continue to linger and take place after the fact. Sometimes it's because they are unaware of the decision, and sometimes it's because the enemy just refuses to give up. And I think that's really the case in our position as followers of Christ, as Christians. We come from we fight a battle because the enemy has decided not to give up and not to stop fighting. He's not conceding his defeat. So Satan, while he was defeated at the cross, death was defeated 3 days later when the tomb was empty and Jesus was not in that tomb. The penalty of our sin was paid for in full, and so the power of sin was absolutely broken. So Satan, he is indeed defeated, and yet he continues to seek to devour because he refuses to surrender. And stupid. Right. And he has this whole host of stupid followers, these fallen angels that he has entrapped and enslaved on his side, and will receive the same really destiny that he has of eternal death. He has this whole host of fallen angels are engaged with him in spiritual warfare, and they're constantly, what they want to do, what they're attempting on a daily basis is to discourage us, to deceive us. Their goal is to divide and destroy any who would choose to follow Jesus. That is their mission. They are relentless in this mission. And yet, here's the good news. Romans, if you want to jot this down, Romans chapter 8, verses 35 through 39, which I read in our opening. So I'll just hit a couple of the highlights from Paul's statement here. He says, "Who shall separate us from the love of Christ?" Here's the good news, right? Who can separate us from this love of Jesus Christ that he has for us? He says, "We are more than conquerors through him who loved us." Nothing will be able to separate us from the love of God in Jesus Christ our Lord. Nothing can separate us from Him. Nothing can separate us from His love. So while we may be under attack constantly, we cannot ultimately lose. Satan cannot snatch you away from God. But that's his goal, is to discourage you to the point of wanting to forget God or stop believing in God, to choose to walk away from God. But listen to John's testimony in Revelation chapter 12, verses 10 through 12. Revelation 12, verses 10 through 12. John says, then, as heaven was opened to him, right, he gets to see this vision of heaven that we will someday, but right now we can only imagine, as Cindy pointed out in Sunday school class, we can only imagine what John got to see with his eyes. And so he says this, I heard a loud voice in heaven say, now have come the salvation, the power, and the kingdom of our God, and the authority of His Christ. For the accuser, who is the devil, right, of our brothers, who accuses them before our God day and night, has been hurled down. The accuser has been defeated. The accuser has been hurled down. And it says they, the followers of Christ, they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. They did not love their lives so much as to shrink from death. Therefore rejoice, you heavens, and dwell in them. Those conquerors are those overcomers are those who would not believe and accept the lie and the deception of Satan and his attacks. So we may live under attack on a constant daily basis, but we are not defeated. And here is more good news, right? God does not leave us without a way to stand up under a heavy attack. He doesn't just say, well, hey, you know what, you're on your own now, because I'm up here, you're down there, so I can't do anything about it. But someday I'm coming back for you, so hold on until then. He doesn't say that to us, right? He says to us, you're under heavy attack, and I will give you a way to stand up under that. See, Satan relentlessly pursues us, but let me give you this promise. God relentlessly protects. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13. Paul encourages us with these words. He says, God is faithful. He says, He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, He will also provide a way out so that you can stand up under it. He does not leave us alone. What He does is He provides us a way to stand strong in the face of the constant attacks of Satan. So you may feel like Satan's relentless pursuit of you is going to wear you down to the point of giving in and giving up. But harder than Satan is pursuing you, God wants to protect you. And that's where our passage that we'll be in for the rest of the month, where we are today, Ephesians chapter 6. We're going to pick up in verse 13. We took a look at 10 through 12 last week. We're going to pick up in 13. And we're not going to get quite as far today as I had initially thought we might, but we're just going to take a look at a couple of verses here, beginning with 13, and see what it is that God gives us as our protection, what He provides for us to put on in the form of this spiritual armor. So beginning in verse 13, Paul says this, therefore, put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground. And after you have done everything, stand. In other words, he's going to give you a way to stand strong against every wave of the enemy's attack. And on the day that Jesus comes back, guess what you'll still be doing? Still be standing. That's right. If you wear this protection faithfully. The day we forget to wear our protection is the day that Satan has an in to begin to chip away at who you are in Christ. So he says, put this on. And it is a daily putting on. God provides it, and we put it on. It's a partnership here. So while Satan is relentlessly pursuing you, God is relentlessly protecting you. And he gives us this full length armor, this spiritual armor to wear. It's the same kind of armor that was given to David. You remember the story of David and Goliath? Remember what happened when, so David's, he's this little scrawny, he's the youngest of his family. In fact, he didn't even get invited to go to the battle with Goliath by the king and the commanders of the army. But all of his brothers did. So he had this little menial task from his dad, go take your brother's lunch. That was his job. So he took his brother's lunch. He saw that Goliath was taunting them, and all of these big, tough soldiers were scared to death of Goliath. And so David said, why are you afraid? I'll go fight him. And of course his brothers all laughed at him and told him, no, you're little, go home. And David said, no, I'll go fight him. So Saul, the king, invites David into his quarters, and he says, okay, if you're going to go fight Goliath, you need to put on my armor to protect you. Remember, David was a little guy. Saul was actually tall and big and strong. And Saul's physical armor wouldn't fit him. Way too big and cumbersome. David's like, I don't need this armor anymore. Remember what he said to Goliath as he approached Goliath on the battlefield? He said, you come at me with sword, spear, javelin. I come to you in the name of the Lord God Almighty. See, he was fully fitted with a spiritual armor and weaponry that he needed for that particular battle. The same armor. See, the worldly armor and all the worldly weapons, they don't work for us in this battle. Any more than Saul's armor worked for David. We wear the same armor that David wore that fit him absolutely perfectly for the battle that he was about to face. We can't stand against the enemy of our souls being clothed in the weaponry of the world, right? We can only stand when we are clothed in Jesus Christ and covered by his Holy Spirit. Period. That's how we come. That's how we face every single battle, every single day that the devil tries to throw at us. We have to be ready for the day of evil. Paul says here, put on the full armor of God so that when the day of evil comes, right? When the day of evil comes, is the day of evil something that is still to come? Absolutely not. The day of evil has come, and it will continue to come. The day of evil has come. Have you listened to the news lately? The day of evil is here. The devil wants to attack us through some horrible ideologies in our society, in our culture. Taking the life of an unborn child, no matter how fully grown that child is in his mother's womb. Do you think that's not a spiritual attack on our world, on motherhood, fatherhood, on child itself. It is a spiritual attack. It is not a physical attack. This is not a battle against New York. This is a battle against death. And if we continue to fight legislators and men and women who would make our laws, we're fighting the wrong battle. This is a spiritual war, a spiritual battle. And just because it's legal in New York doesn't make it right. It's despicable and it is unholy in God's eyes. That's why we have to stand. Because the day of evil has come and it will continue to come. We are force-fed daily that the unnatural things of life that God hates, we are being force-fed to view them as something beautiful. I mean, just the other day I was watching TV and there were Christian parents on this particular program who wanted to help their homosexual child overcome her homosexuality, this sin that was in her life. And they portrayed the Christian parents as villains and abusers of their child. Listen, I understand that we live in a world that has made homosexuality, abortion, and so many other sins. The world has made them normal in our society, right? I mean, but where we have to stand is not allowing them to become normalized in thoughts in our minds and hearts and in the body of Christ. We love the people, but we don't have to love behavior, the sinfulness that comes. We have to stand strong in love and compassion for the person that Satan is trying to destroy. And never let him destroy you in the process. See, the day of evil has indeed come, and it continues to come. Mass murders, school shootings, violence on the streets of our neighboring cities, terrorism that knows no boundary. This world is full of egregious and evil that just continues to be thrown at us day after day, hour after hour, moment by moment. What about the evil that lurks in our own hearts and minds? Though it's easy to point to evil as something over there, out there in the world, the things that abhor us. But what about those things that lurk in our own hearts and our minds? The things that Satan is whispering in our ears to entice us, to tempt us to sin. And as James says, that once we are gripped by it, it drags us away and it destroys us from the inside out, and it leads us to death. He tempts us with pornography and lust. He tempts us with things that would grip us through addictions, with materialism and materialistic ideas and the need for more and more. He tempts and entices us with jealousy and with the lies of our own inadequacies and worthlessness, right? He's constantly tempting us, and he's lurking in the dark places of our own hearts and our minds, wanting to lure us into his presence. Continually facing this evil. And the day continues to come. Paul says there's only one way to stand. There's only one way to stand and remain standing. So not only does Paul tell us to stand, but he tells us how to withstand this wave after wave of the evil, so that in the end, when Jesus comes for us, we will be standing. So here's what the full armor of God looks like, right? Let's take each piece as it's perfectly fitted for you. Verse 14. Begin here. It says, stand firm then with the belt of truth buckled around your waist. Now, remember Paul here is, of course, just using the imagery of the Roman soldiers' armor as a metaphor for our spiritual armor. You get that, right? The belt of the armor is really that thing that holds, that centerpiece that holds all the rest of the main parts and pieces of the protective gear together. Without the belt, everything would fall. Without the belt, there's no place to hold the sword. Even without the belt, you have nothing. In fact, they would even, when they're getting ready to run, they would take their tunic and they would tuck it into the belt. It was something that was there to hold everything together. It was the centerpiece of their armor. And it was a necessity. So the belt of truth, the belt in the armor for us is Jesus Christ himself, the truth. He says very clearly of himself, I am the way, the what? The truth and the life. He is, in fact, the truth. He is indeed the centerpiece of our lives. In fact, Paul not only says the centerpiece of our lives, he's the centerpiece of all life. In Colossians chapter 1, verse 17, Paul says to the church there, he says that not only did God create all things, not only were all things made for him and by him, but all things are held together by him. Right? Satan's very first attack on humanity was when he asked Adam and Eve a very simple question, causing them to question God's truth. Did God really say? From the very beginning, Satan was trying to unbuckle the belt of truth around our waist. He caused Adam and Eve to question the validity of God's word. And Satan is constantly and continually whispering in your ear, sometimes an outright lie and sometimes just a twisting a variation of the truth, so that we would begin to question God's very word. He has us questioning God's reality. He has us questioning God's truth. He has us questioning God's creative ability and creation. He has us questioning the validity of our Bible. We hold in our hands and see as God's word. Chip Ingram, preacher, maybe you've heard him on the radio, he's partially quoting someone else here when he says this. He says, the best of truth is the man or woman whose mind will practice no deceit and attempt no disguises in their walk with God. Listen, in order to stand and to be able to stand in the end, we must not waver in any way on God's truth. It holds the rest of everything else, all the other pieces of our armor, it holds it all together. Without the truth buckled around our waist, nothing else even matters. Without an unaltered belief in God's truth, we cannot put on the rest or the next pieces of his armor. So with God's truth buckled around our waist, we can then, as he says, we can stand with the breastplate of righteousness in place. It's worth noting here the Roman soldier's armor, the breastplate covers just that, the breast area. What does it not cover? The back. What does that imply? He protects us as we face forward into the attacks of Satan. We are not ever to retreat. God says you have nothing to fear with him on our side. If you're wearing his protective gear, you have nothing to fear as you can face, squarely look Satan right in the eyes and say, I am not afraid of you. I'm not afraid of you. Because what is standing behind us? Remember last week I used that imagery of when we resist the devil, that means we're coming near to God, and the nearer I am to God, the more afraid Satan is. Because Satan's not afraid of us, but he is afraid of God, like our big friend who stands behind us when a bully is trying to face us and he runs away because he sees him, not scrawny little me. That's how Satan is. God's got our back. He's got our six. We can always face forward. There's no retreating when you are certain about what is right. That's what righteousness means. Righteousness simply means here, this breastplate of righteousness. Righteousness simply means right living, integrity in one's lifestyle and character. We are righteous when we conform our will to the very will of God himself, because he is righteous. There is no one righteous, no, not one, except for God himself. He is the standard of righteousness. He is what all righteousness is measured from. And so if we stand on what is right by who God is, standard of righteousness, who he is, if we stand in his righteousness, then we can stand. Paul says in Romans 12, verse 2, he says, don't conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and prove what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. See, when we put our faith in Jesus Christ and his work done for us on the cross, then that's when we are in right standing before God. Because when you've put on Christ, what does God see when you stand before him? He sees Christ in you, in the righteousness of Jesus Christ and not your own. So when God sees us, he sees his Son. We are clothed in him. But to put the breastplate of righteousness on as part of our daily armor, what that means is that we live in the right living of Jesus by the transformative work of his Holy Spirit in us, changing us from who we were to who he wants us to be. And then righteousness, it guards and it protects our heart, that very seat of our being, our very lives. And as Satan attacks, even as we sometimes fall, sometimes we fail, guess what? We will always still find ourselves forgiven, not guilt. But see, that's what Satan wants us to not believe. He wants us to believe you are not righteous. Look what you did. And God cannot see you as righteous because look what you did. Right? He wants us to doubt the very righteous. And so he penetrates our hearts and we get discouraged of who we are and what we believe, how we believe God views us. And that's how he wants to destroy us. But if we have the breastplate of righteousness on, we know that we are covered by the righteousness of Jesus Christ and not our own. And so when you fail, and you say, God, I'm sorry. You do not have to be overcome and overwhelmed by the guilt and the shame because God doesn't see you. He sees the forgiven you covered by the righteousness of Jesus Christ. You come before him and he washes you pure so that you can be in his. And it's in this confidence that I am in his will, covered by the righteousness of Jesus Christ, that I can be ready that in my daily with my daily marching orders. What was Jesus' final command to his disciples, to his apostles before he left? Go into all the world and what? This is the next part of the armor that he's talking about. Verse 15. And with your feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. See, your shoes truly are the foundation from which you stand, right? And that was very true with the Roman soldier. In fact, many would say that many of their battles were won because they had better shoes to march in than anyone else. And for us, the gospel of peace, the gospel of Jesus Christ, is the foundation for all that we believe. And when you know the truth, and you are safe in God's will, you'll be ready to go and share this gospel of peace with others. See, what the gospel is, what it actually communicates is that we are now at peace with God. Where once we were enemies of God because of our sin, because of our unrighteousness, no one is righteous, no, not one, but because of our unrighteousness, we were enemies of God. We were at war with God because of our sinfulness. And what the gospel has done for us is it's made us at peace with God. And if we're at peace with God, and yet we're at war with the world, when we look around, what we see are a bunch of people who are outside of Christ that are at war with God. Do you want them to be at war with God or at war with Satan? I want my loved ones, my friends, my family, my community to be at war with Satan, because if you're fighting a war with Satan, then you're fighting from a place of victory, not for victory. If you're fighting God, you're still trying to fight for victory. And guess who's already won? So if we're fitted with the shoes of the gospel of peace, what that means is we're ready at all times to go with this message of peace, that you can fight from victory, not for victory. Paul says in Romans 10, he's quoting Isaiah. He says, beautiful. Feet of those. Bring goodness. So your feet can be fitted with gospel, beauty of the gospel of peace. Or they can be dragged through this manual and destroyed. And you'll have nothing to stand on that day when Jesus comes back. My encouragement to you, if you want to remain standing when Jesus returns, is to stand against the devil and his schemes, wearing the full armor of God, not with the armor and the weaponry of this world, not of our physical prowess and abilities and our own physical strength, but to stand in the full spiritual armor of God, knowing and believing the absolute truth of God. And knowing that when he sees you, because you've accepted Jesus Christ, you've accepted his truth, he sees you as righteous in his sight because you're covered by Jesus Christ and his righteousness. And that makes you ready in season, out of season, to share this gospel with somebody else. There's no greater defense against Satan than to defeat him by saving one or two from his grip. I encourage you to stand. Put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you will be able to stand. Father, I thank you so much